The morning light filtered through the frost-covered windows of Freya Ashford's chambers, casting pale diamonds across the white silk wedding gown that hung like a ghost from the wardrobe door. She should have been admiring it. She should have been allowing the servants to dress her hair with the silver pins her mother had worn, feeling the flutter of bridal nerves in her stomach. Instead, she knelt on the cold stone floor of her bathing chamber, retching into a basin, her body betraying the secret she could no longer deny. 3 months. She had hidden it for 3 months, attributing the missed cycles to stress, the nausea to anxiety about the arranged marriage. But this morning, with her wedding to Lord Marcus Thorne mere hours away, her body had decided to make the truth undeniable. Her hand pressed against the still flat plane of her belly, and she felt it, that flicker of life, impossibly real, impossibly present. The traveling merchant with the kind eyes and the warm laugh. One night of foolish comfort when her world had been crumbling around her, when her father's gambling debts had been exposed, and her family's pack had begun its shameful decline. He had been gentle. He had made her feel, for a few stolen hours, like she was worth something more than a bargaining chip. And then he had vanished with the morning mist, leaving her with nothing but memories and, as she now understood with horrifying clarity, a child. I cannot do this, she thought, her fingers white-knuckled against the basin's edge. I cannot marry Marcus carrying another's baby. I cannot lie in his bed and let him believe. But what choice did she have? The marriage contract was signed. Her brother Sebastian had negotiated it himself, trading Freya's hand for Lord Thorne's military support and financial backing. Without this alliance, the Ashford pack would collapse entirely. They would become rogues, scattered and vulnerable, easy prey for the stronger packs that circled like vultures. The child inside her was not just her secret to bear. It was a lit fuse attached to her entire family's survival. Freya forced herself to stand, wiping her mouth with a trembling hand. In the mirror, a stranger stared back at her. A woman with hollow cheeks and haunted silver eyes, her dark hair hanging limp around a face gone pale as bone. This was not the radiant bride her family expected. This was a woman standing at the edge of an abyss, trying to decide whether to jump or be pushed. She chose the gown. She chose the silver pins. She let the servants paint color onto her bloodless lips and weave flowers into her hair. And she walked down the great staircase of Ashford Hall as if she were not carrying a bomb in her womb. The ceremony passed in a blur of incense and formal words. Lord Marcus Thorne stood at the altar, handsome in his dark formal attire, his amber eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he claimed his bride. Freya spoke her vows through numb lips, feeling her wolf whimper in the back of her mind, pressing against her consciousness with growing agitation. Something is wrong, her wolf seemed to say. He is not. Not what? Not the merchant who had left her pregnant and alone? Of course he wasn't. That man had been a fantasy, a moment of weakness she could never afford to repeat. The feast that followed was lavish, the great hall filled with the cream of werewolf nobility, all watching the new alliance with calculating eyes. Freya sat beside her husband. Husband, the word felt like ash on her tongue, and smiled until her face ached. It was Sebastian who finally cornered her, pulling her into an alcove as the guests danced and drank. You look ill, sister. His voice was sharp, his blue eyes, so like their father's, narrowing with suspicion. Is there something you need to tell me before you retire to your marriage bed? Freya's heart seized. I'm merely tired, Sebastian. The day has been overwhelming. Don't lie to me. His hand closed around her wrist, squeezing hard enough to bruise. I've watched you these past weeks, Freya. The secret glances at your belly, the careful way you've been eating, the convenient headaches that kept you from strong wine. His lip curled. You're pregnant. The word hung between them like a blade. Sebastian, please. Please what? Please don't notice that you've ruined everything our family has worked for. Please don't mention that you've whored yourself out and now expect Lord Thorn to raise some bastard as his heir. He shook her, hard enough that her teeth rattled. Who is the father? A traveler. He passed through months ago. I never even knew his name. The slap cracked across her face before she could finish. Freya stumbled, catching herself against the wall, her ears ringing. You stupid, worthless creature. Sebastian's voice was ice. Do you have any idea what you've done? When Marcus discovers this, and he will discover it, the alliance will shatter. The Thorns will have grounds for war. You have single-handedly destroyed the Ashford pack because you couldn't keep your legs closed. Tears burned in Freya's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I made a mistake. I know that. But the child is innocent, Sebastian. I'll find a way to explain, to make Marcus understand. Understand? Sebastian laughed, a cruel cutting sound. You'll tell him tonight, before he touches you. You'll confess your sin and accept whatever judgment he delivers, because I will not let your shame drag us all into the grave. He dragged her through the celebration, his grip iron around her arm, ignoring the curious stares of the guests. Lord Marcus stood near the fire, accepting congratulations from a cluster of nobles. His smile faded when he saw Sebastian's thunderous expression. Brother, Marcus said slowly, his eyes flicking between them. Is something amiss? Ask your wife. Sebastian shoved Freya forward and she stumbled, catching herself against Marcus's chest. Ask her what she's been hiding. The great hall fell silent. Every eye turned toward them, and Freya felt the weight of 100 gazes crushing down on her. Her wolf howled in distress, pressing against her skin, desperate to escape this nightmare. Tell him now, before Sebastian does. Marcus. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I'm pregnant. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Marcus's face went through a rapid transformation, confusion, disbelief, and then cold, murderous rage. Explain. Before we were betrothed, before I even knew the arrangement would be made, there was a man, a traveler. I thought I would never see him again, I thought. You thought you would pass off another's brat as my heir? Marcus's hand closed around her throat, lifting her until her toes barely touched the ground. You thought you would make a fool of me before my entire pack? Freya clawed at his wrist, fighting for air. Please, the child. The child is abomination. Marcus's eyes blazed gold, his wolf surging forward. And you are nothing but a whore. He threw her. Freya sailed through the air, crashing against the banquet table, sending crystal and silver clattering to the floor. Pain exploded through her ribs, her hip, her shoulder. Sebastian Valewood. Marcus's voice rang through the hall like a war drum. Your sister has made a mockery of this alliance. I demand satisfaction. Sebastian stepped forward, his face a mask of cold calculation. Lord Thorn, the Ashford pack offers no defense for this betrayal. Freya has acted alone, against the wishes of her family. She is hereby denounced, stripped of her name and her protection. She is no sister of mine. Freya struggled to her knees, blood dripping from a cut on her forehead. Sebastian, please. Be silent. He didn't even look at her. Lord Thorn, what would you have done with her? Marcus smiled, and it was a terrible thing. Cast her out. Let her die in the winter forest like the animal she is. If she survives, she's no longer the concern of either pack. If she doesn't, he shrugged. The wolves will have their due. Guards grabbed Freya before she could run. They dragged her through the hall, past the nobles who whispered and sneered, past the servants who averted their eyes, past the great doors and into the howling winter night. The cold hit her like a physical blow. Snow swirled in vicious eddies, and the wind cut through her wedding gown as if it were made of paper. The guards threw her forward, and she landed hard on the frozen ground, the impact driving the breath from her lungs. "Don't come back," one of them called. "There's nothing for you here." The doors slammed shut behind them. Freya lay in the snow, her body screaming with pain, her mind fragmenting with shock. Blood seeped from her forehead, her hip throbbed where she'd struck the table, and beneath it all, she felt the terrified flutter of the life inside her. "Get up," her wolf snarled. "Get up or die. Get up or lose the pup." She got up. The forest stretched before her, dark and endless, the trees groaning under their burden of ice. She had no food, no warmth, no destination, nothing but the desperate instinct to survive. Her bare feet left bloody prints in the snow as she stumbled forward. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time lost meaning in the frozen hellscape. The cold crept into her bones, into her blood, turning her thoughts sluggish and strange. She fell, got up, fell again. Each time it took longer to rise. The pup, she kept thinking. Have to protect the pup. She didn't know when she crossed the border. There were no markers, no signs, just a sudden shift in the air, a scent of pine and power that made her wolf sit up in startled recognition. Royal territory. The Alpha King's domain. Freya collapsed at the base of an ancient oak, too exhausted to take another step. Snow covered her in a soft, deadly blanket. Her eyes drifted closed. The last thing she heard, before darkness claimed her, was the sound of approaching footsteps, and a voice, deep as winter thunder, saying, "Bring her inside, now." Warmth. It was the first sensation that pierced the darkness. Warmth, seeping into her frozen limbs like honey spreading through water. Freya drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of soft surfaces beneath her, of crackling flames somewhere nearby, of voices murmuring in low, urgent tones. "Hypothermia, but she'll recover." "The injuries are superficial, Your Majesty, though the cut on her forehead will need—" "And the child?" A pause. Freya's wolf stirred at that last voice, something in its timbre making her instincts prickle with awareness even through the fog of exhaustion. "The child lives, sire. She's approximately 3 months along. It's a miracle, given what she's endured." "Leave us." The command brooked no argument. Freya heard footsteps retreating, a door closing with a soft click. Then silence, broken only by the pop and hiss of the fire. She should open her eyes. She should assess her situation, determine whether she'd escaped one danger only to stumble into another. The Alpha King's territory was legendary, whispered about in equal parts reverence and terror. He was said to be ancient, cold, merciless. A king who had ruled for 3 centuries without ever taking a mate, without ever showing weakness. And now she lay in his domain, pregnant, disgraced, and utterly at his mercy. "Open your eyes," her wolf urged. "We need to see." Freya obeyed. The chamber swam into focus slowly, rich tapestries in deep burgundy and gold, a fire blazing in an enormous hearth, windows frosted with ice but rattling against a wind she could no longer feel. She lay in a bed that could have held 6 people, buried under furs so soft they felt like clouds against her battered skin. And beside the bed, watching her with eyes the color of a winter storm, sat a man. No, not a man. Something more. Something that made her wolf go absolutely still in a way it never had before. Not even when Marcus had wrapped his hand around her throat. He was massive, even seated. Shoulders that seemed carved from mountain stone. Hands that rested on his knees with a stillness that spoke of perfect control. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples, and his face was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful. Sharp, dangerous, ancient. But it was his eyes that held her. gray as storm clouds, gray as the moment before lightning struck, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then their gazes locked fully, and the world shattered. Heat flooded Freya's chest, not the gradual warmth of the fire, but something instantaneous and overwhelming, like sunlight breaking through ice after an endless winter. Her wolf surged forward with a keening cry that resonated through every fiber of her being, a recognition so profound it bordered on pain. Mate, mate, mate. The word echoed through her mind like a bell being struck, again and again, undeniable and terrifying. Her skin prickled with sudden awareness, every nerve ending alive to his presence in a way that defied explanation. She could feel him, not just see him, but feel him, as if an invisible thread had suddenly pulled taut between them, connecting her to this stranger in a way she'd never been connected to anyone. Across from her, the Alpha King went utterly still. She watched it happen, watched gold bleed into the gray of his irises like ink spreading through water, watched his pupils dilate, watched his chest expand with a sharp, sudden inhale. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not threatening but hungry, the sound of a predator catching a scent it had been seeking for centuries. Impossible, he breathed. His voice was the same one she'd heard before losing consciousness, deep as winter thunder, resonant with power. But now it was rough, fractured at the edges. His hand rose toward her face as if pulled by gravity itself, and Freya watched it approach with a mixture of terror and longing that made no sense. She was pregnant with another man's child. She was disgraced, cast out, broken. She had no right to feel this pull toward anyone, let alone the most powerful wolf in the known world. But her wolf didn't care about logic. Her wolf pressed against her skin, whining with desperate need, urging her to lean into his touch, to bare her throat, to submit in a way she'd never wanted to submit to anyone. His fingers stopped a hair's breadth from her cheek. Heat radiated from his skin, and she could smell him now. Pine and wood smoke, and something darker, muskier, unmistakably male. Her mouth went dry. "What is your name?" The question was barely more than a whisper. "Freya." Her voice cracked. "Freya Ashford." Something flickered in those gold-gray eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. The bride who was cast out tonight. My scouts reported the incident at the Thorn wedding. Of course he knew. Of course word had traveled. Freya closed her eyes, shame washing over her in a bitter wave. "Then you know what I am. What I've done. I know what others have done to you." His voice hardened. "I know you were thrown into a winter storm in nothing but a wedding gown. I know you walked for miles on bare feet, bleeding, pregnant, with no destination and no hope of survival." A pause. "I know courage when I see it." Her eyes flew open. That was not what she'd expected him to say. He was still watching her, his hand still hovering near her face, and the bond between them thrummed with a tension that made her want to simultaneously flee and press closer. Her wolf had settled into a low, constant hum of awareness, no longer surging but waiting, watching, wanting. "You feel it too," she whispered. Not a question. "I feel it." He withdrew his hand slowly, and she was ashamed of the disappointment that flickered through her. "I have not felt it in 300 years of life. I had begun to believe I was not fated for such things." 300 years. The number should have terrified her. This ancient, powerful creature looking at her like she was the answer to prayers he'd stopped saying. Instead, it made something in her chest ache with an emotion she couldn't name. "I'm pregnant," she said, because he needed to understand. "With another man's child. Whatever this bond is, whatever it means, I am not what you think I am. I am not worthy of—" "Do not," he interrupted, and his voice carried the weight of command. Tell me what you are, or are not worthy of. Freya fell silent, stunned by the quiet ferocity in his tone. You carry a child, he continued, settling back in his chair with that preternatural stillness. That child will want for nothing. I swear it on my crown. The words hung in the air between them, a vow spoken with the gravity of ancient oaths. Freya stared at him, trying to understand. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you? Because you are my mate. He said it simply, as if it explained everything, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And because a child is innocent of the circumstances of its creation. Whatever happened before tonight is irrelevant. What matters now is that you are here, you are safe, and you will remain so for as long as you wish. Freya's throat tightened. She thought of Sebastian's face, twisted with disgust. She thought of Marcus's hand around her throat, the hatred in his eyes. She thought of every voice that had called her whore, ruined, worthless. And now this king, this ancient, powerful, terrifying king, looked at her as if she were something precious rather than something broken. You don't even know if the bond is real, she managed. We've barely spoken. How can you make such promises? A ghost of a smile crossed his austere features, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. I have waited 3 centuries, Freya Ashford. I have watched countless wolves find their mates, watched bonds form and strengthen and endure. I know what this is. I know what you are to me. He tilted his head, studying her with those ancient eyes. The question is not whether I will honor this bond. The question is whether you will allow yourself to believe it. She had no answer for that. The emotions swirling through her were too tangled, too raw. Gratitude and fear and that persistent, undeniable pull toward him that made her wolf purr with satisfaction. Rest, he said, rising from his chair with fluid grace. The healer will return to tend your wounds properly. We will speak more when you've recovered. He moved toward the door, and Freya felt the distance between them like a physical ache. The bond stretching, protesting the separation even though he was only crossing the room. Your Majesty. He paused, half turning. What is your name? Another flicker of that almost smile. Bastion Windrider. But you may call me Bastion, mate. Then he was gone, and Freya was left alone with the fire and the furs and the impossible reality of what had just happened. She was the Alpha King's mate. The thought should have terrified her. In many ways, it did. But beneath the fear, beneath the confusion and the shame that still clung to her like a second skin, something else stirred. Hope. It was fragile, barely more than a whisper, but it was there, and her wolf curled around it protectively, guarding that tiny flame as if it were the most precious thing in the world. 3 days passed. The healer, a kind-eyed woman named Margot who spoke softly and never asked uncomfortable questions, came twice daily to check Freya's injuries and monitor the pregnancy. The cut on her forehead was healing cleanly. Her ribs were bruised but not broken. Her feet, which had been torn to ribbons by the frozen ground, were mending with supernatural speed. The bond, Margot explained when Freya asked about her rapid recovery. Even incomplete, it strengthens you. The king's power flows through the connection, accelerating your healing. Freya touched the bandage on her forehead, wondering at the strange intimacy of it. Bastion's power working within her body, mending what was broken, even from a distance. She saw him only briefly during those first days. He would appear at her door each evening, his massive frame filling the entrance, those storm-gray eyes sweeping over her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He never entered the room. He never touched her. He simply asked if she needed anything, listened to her quiet assurances that she was comfortable, and then withdrew with a small nod. It was the restraint that undid her. She had expected demands. She had expected him to use the bond as leverage, to press his advantage while she was vulnerable and alone. That was what alphas did. What Marcus would have done. What Sebastian would have counseled any alpha to do. But Bastian kept his distance. He gave her space to heal, to think, to come to terms with the impossible situation in which she found herself. He asked for nothing. He demanded nothing. He simply waited. On the fourth morning, Freya woke to voices in the corridor outside her chamber. Does His Majesty expect us to accept this? She arrives pregnant with another's bastard, wearing another man's wedding gown, and we're to simply bow and scrape? The voice was female, sharp with aristocratic contempt. Freya's wolf bristled, but she stayed still, listening. The king has made his position clear, Lady Visara. A second voice, male, colder. She is under his protection. Protection. The woman laughed. Is that what we're calling it now? The disgraced Ashford whore spreads her legs for our king, and suddenly she's untouchable? Heat flooded Freya's face. The words shouldn't have hurt. She'd heard worse at the Thorn wedding, had them screamed at her as she was dragged through the snow. But somehow, here, in this place, where she had begun to feel almost safe, they cut deeper. They're right, part of her whispered. You are everything they say you are. She was out of bed before she made the conscious decision to move. Her legs were still weak, her body still healing, but anger gave her strength. She would not cower in this room while strangers spoke her name like a curse. The door swung open, and the nobles in the corridor fell silent. There were 3 of them, a woman in silk so fine it seemed to shimmer, her lips curved in a cruel smile, a man with silver hair, and the bearing of a military commander, and a younger man who looked between them with obvious discomfort. Lady Ashford, the woman said, recovering first. Her smile sharpened. I didn't realize you were well enough to eavesdrop. It's difficult not to hear when you speak so loudly, Lady Visara. Freya kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. I apologize if my presence offends you. I assure you, I did not ask to be brought here. No, you simply appeared on our doorstep like a stray cat, pregnant and desperate. Lady Visara stepped closer, her eyes raking over Freya's borrowed nightgown with undisguised contempt. Tell me, did you plan this? Seduce the king with your pitiful story. Make him believe you're his mate so you can secure a place for your bastard? That's enough. The voice came from the end of the corridor, and it carried the weight of absolute authority. Bastian stood there, having appeared without a sound, his face a mask of cold fury. Gold flickered at the edges of his irises as he strode toward them, and Freya watched Lady Visara's confidence crumble like ash. Your Majesty, I was simply— You were insulting a woman under my protection. He stopped between Freya and the noblewoman, his shoulders a wall of muscle and barely contained rage. You were calling her whore in my halls. You were questioning my judgment in my own palace. Lady Visara's face went pale. Sire, I meant no— Silence. The word cracked through the air like a whip. Freya Ashford is my guest. She is under my protection. The next voice raised against her will answered to me personally. Do I make myself clear? The silver-haired man bowed stiffly. Perfectly clear, Your Majesty. Lady Visara. Bastian's voice dropped to something almost soft, almost gentle, and somehow that was more terrifying than his rage. You will apologize to Lady Ashford, now. For a moment rebellion flashed in the noblewoman's eyes, then self-preservation won out. She curtsied, her movements jerky with suppressed anger. I apologize, Lady Ashford. My words were unbecoming. Freya inclined her head, not trusting her voice. Bastian waited until the 3 nobles had retreated around the corner before turning to her. The gold faded from his eyes, leaving behind something that might have been concern. You should be resting. I couldn't sleep through being called a whore. The words came out sharper than she intended. I've heard it enough times in the past week. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, barely perceptible but there nonetheless. You will not hear it again, not in these halls. You can't protect me from every whisper, Your Majesty. I can try. He studied her for a moment, then offered his arm. Come. You've been confined to that chamber for days. Allow me to show you the palace gardens. The winter roses are blooming, and you could use the fresh air. Freya hesitated. This was new territory, not just the palace, but the strange intimacy of walking beside him, allowing him close enough to touch. The bond hummed between them, eager and impatient, urging her to take his arm, to lean into his warmth. He defended you, her wolf pointed out. He stood between you and those who would harm you. What alpha has ever done that for us? None. The answer was none. Slowly, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something softer, Freya placed her hand on his arm. His skin was warm even through the fabric of his shirt, and she felt the flecks of muscle beneath her fingers. He went still for just a moment, savoring the contact perhaps, or simply surprised that she'd accepted, before beginning to walk. They moved through corridors that gleamed with ancient grandeur, past servants who bowed low and whispered behind their hands, past doors that led to chambers Freya couldn't begin to imagine. Throughout it all, Bastion kept her pace, never rushing, never pulling ahead. When they reached the gardens, Freya understood why he'd brought her here. The winter roses were impossible. They shouldn't have existed. Blooms of palest silver and deep crimson, flourishing despite the frost that coated everything else. Their scent filled the air, sweet and sharp, cutting through the cold. My grandmother planted them, Bastion said, watching her reaction. 3 centuries ago, when this palace was first built. They've never stopped blooming, even in the harshest winters. Freya reached out to touch a petal, marveling at its silk-soft texture. They're beautiful. They remind me that beautiful things can survive impossible conditions. He paused, and when she looked up, he was watching her with that intensity again. If they can endure, so can you. The words settled into her chest, warming places that had been cold for longer than she could remember. You shouldn't be kind to me, she whispered. It makes it harder to leave when I eventually must. Leave? His brow furrowed. Why would you leave? Because I'm not. She struggled to find the words. This bond, whatever it is, doesn't change what I am. I'm pregnant. I'm disgraced. I've brought nothing but shame to my family and danger to yours. When my brother discovers where I've gone, he'll come for me. Sebastian won't let me live, not carrying evidence of your brother. Bastion's voice went flat, dangerous. The one who had you thrown into the snow. He was protecting the Alliance, protecting our family. He was protecting himself. The gold was back in his eyes, burning bright. I've heard reports. Sebastian Ashford has been consolidating power within your pack for years, using your father's debts as leverage. He negotiated your marriage not to save your family, but to position himself as the primary beneficiary of the Thorn Alliance. Freya stared at him. That's not... He wouldn't... But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Sebastian's eagerness to finalize the contract, his cold calculation when she'd confessed. The way he'd denounced her publicly, stripping her of protection before she could even attempt to defend herself. He called you worthless, she remembered. He watched them throw you into the storm and didn't say a word. Your brother is not coming to reclaim you out of familial love. Bastion's voice softened, but the fury remained in his eyes. If he comes at all, it will be to silence you permanently. You and your child are threats to the narrative he's constructing. The wronged brother, the honorable alpha who tried to save his family from his shameful sister. Then what am I supposed to do? The question broke from her, raw with desperation. Hide here forever? Let you fight my battles while I cower behind your throne? You could accept the bond. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. You could let me protect you not as a guest, but as a mate. You could let me claim you, acknowledge you before the court, give you the power and protection that comes with being my queen. He stepped closer, and the air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. You could let me love you, Freya, if you'd only give me the chance. Her breath caught. Her wolf surged forward, desperate to accept, to submit, to finally belong to someone who wanted her. But the fear was still there, coiled in her chest like a serpent. I don't know how, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to trust. Every time I've trusted someone, I know. He didn't touch her, but his presence surrounded her like a physical embrace. I'm not asking you to trust me today. I'm asking you to let me earn it. However long that takes. However many times I have to prove myself. I will wait. Freya looked up at him. This ancient king, this powerful alpha who could have demanded anything from her and instead asked only for the chance to prove himself worthy. Why? She whispered. Why would you wait for someone like me? The ghost of a smile crossed his features again, warmer this time. Because you are my mate. And because I have already waited 3 centuries. What is a little longer? Something cracked open in her chest, a wall she hadn't known she'd built beginning to crumble. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was the possibility of trust. The first fragile step toward believing that not everyone who offered kindness wanted something in return. Okay, she breathed. Okay, I'll try. Bastion's smile widened just slightly, and for a moment, the cold, austere king looked almost young. That, he said quietly, is all I ask. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Freya hadn't expected. She woke each morning in the chamber that had become hers, fire crackling in the hearth, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the winter gardens. A servant brought her breakfast, warm bread, honey, sliced fruit that should have been impossible to find in this season, and left with a quiet bow that still made Freya uncomfortable. She wasn't accustomed to being served. She was accustomed to being dismissed. Bastion didn't push. He appeared at her door each morning, asking if she'd like to walk with him, and accepted her answer without argument whether it was yes or no. Most mornings, she said yes. The gardens drew her, those impossible roses blooming in defiance of winter, and his company had become something she didn't dread, something she almost welcomed. On the 5th morning since her collapse in the snow, Freya sat in the library she'd discovered on the palace's 2nd floor. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines cracked with age, their pages filled with histories she'd never learned. She'd found a volume on pack lineages and was tracing her finger down the Ashford family tree when the door opened behind her. She expected Bastion. She didn't expect the scent that washed over her, familiar in a way that made her stomach clench with dread. Sister. Sebastian stood in the doorway, dressed in traveling clothes that bore the dust of hard riding. His dark hair was windswept, his eyes, so like hers, so like their mother's, fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. He looked thinner than she remembered, the angles of his face sharper, but his smile was the same, warm on the surface, cold underneath. Sebastian. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. How did you find me? Word travels fast when the Alpha King takes in a stray. He crossed the library with measured steps, his boots silent on the thick carpets. You've caused quite the scandal, Freya. Running from your wedding, finding shelter with the most powerful wolf in the realm. Some might call it calculated. Some might call it survival. She closed the book, using the motion to mask the trembling of her hands. You had me thrown into a blizzard, in my wedding gown, barefoot. I had you removed from a volatile situation. His smile never wavered. Marcus was furious. He would have killed you if you'd stayed. I saved your life. By stripping me of my name? By calling me a whore in front of both packs? By giving you a chance to run. He stopped an arm's length away, and Freya had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. When had her brother grown so tall? Or had she simply forgotten, in the weeks of isolation and fear, how much larger he was than her? I'm here to bring you home, sister. To make things right. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Freya almost believed it. Almost felt the old pull of family loyalty, the desperate hope that maybe Sebastian truly did care for her beneath all his ambition. Then she remembered Bastian's words in the garden. If he comes at all, it will be to silence you permanently. The Alpha King has offered me sanctuary, she said carefully. I'm safe here. Safe? Sebastian laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You're a pawn here, Freya. A pretty distraction for a king who's grown bored of ruling alone. The moment he tires of you, you'll be discarded again. At least with family, you have a place. A purpose. What purpose? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Being traded to the next suitable alpha? Bearing children to strengthen alliances you've negotiated? Something flickered in Sebastian's eyes, there and gone before she could name it. You're carrying a child now, aren't you? The healer's report mentioned it. A bastard. Fathered by some merchant who took his pleasure and vanished. He stepped closer, and his scent wrapped around her, cloying and suffocating. Come home, sister. We can make this disappear. Find you a husband who won't ask questions. Raise the child as his own. No one has to know. Make this disappear. The words coiled in her gut like ice. He wasn't offering to help her. He was offering to erase her shame, and with it, any evidence of his own failure to protect his family's honor. I'm not leaving. Sebastian's smile finally cracked. Just slightly, just at the edges, but enough to reveal the cold calculation beneath. You don't have a choice. The Ashford Pack has formally requested your return. As your alpha, I have the authority to... She is not yours to claim. Bastian's voice cut through the library like thunder, and Freya felt the bond pulse with sudden warmth. He stood in the doorway Sebastian had entered through, filling the frame with his massive shoulders, his gray eyes burning with barely contained gold. Sebastian turned slowly, deliberately, his posture shifting from predator to diplomat in the space of a breath. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. I merely wish to speak with my sister privately. Your sister nearly died on my border because of what your pack did to her. Bastian didn't move from the doorway, but his presence seemed to fill the room. She is under my protection now. If you wish to speak with her, you will do so in my presence, with my permission. With respect, sire, this is a family matter. She carries my mate bond. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. That makes it my matter. Freya watched Sebastian's face cycle through shock, calculation, and something that looked almost like fear before settling into careful neutrality. Your mate bond. How fortuitous. You will address your business to my council, Bastian continued, each word precise and cold. If you have legitimate concerns regarding pack relations, they will be heard. But you will not approach Freya alone again. Am I understood? Sebastian bowed, the motion stiff with suppressed anger. Perfectly, Your Majesty. He swept past Bastian without another glance at Freya, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Freya released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her hands trembling against the book in her lap. Bastian crossed to her in 3 long strides, dropping to one knee beside her chair. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? No. No, I'm fine. But her voice shook, and her wolf was pressing against her skin, desperate for the comfort of his presence. He said he wants to bring me home, to make this disappear. Your pregnancy. Yes, The word came out thick with unshed tears. He wants to erase everything. Marry me off quietly. Claim the baby as someone else's heir. Make sure no one ever knows that the Ashford family's shame nearly ruined their precious alliance. Bastian's hand found hers, warm and steady. He cannot take you from here. I won't allow it. He's my alpha. The old loyalty burned in her chest, twisted and painful. Pack law gives him authority over unmated females. If he invokes the formal right of return, you are not unmated. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the touch gentle despite the fury still burning in his eyes. The bond exists between us. It has existed since the moment you opened your eyes in that bed. Pack law recognizes mate bonds as superseding all other claims. But I haven't accepted it. We haven't completed. The law does not require completion. Something softened in his expression, though the protective anger remained. Only acknowledgement. And you acknowledged it in the garden, when you agreed to try. Freya stared at him, this ancient king kneeling at her feet like a supplicant. You're using the bond to protect me. I'm using everything I have to protect you. His grip on her hand tightened. Is that not what mates do? The walls around her heart cracked a little further. She didn't pull away. That evening, Bastian arranged for dinner in his private chambers rather than the great hall. The court will talk, he said, leading her through corridors that seemed to empty before them as servants melted out of their path. But they would talk regardless. At least this way, you can eat without dozens of eyes watching every bite. The chambers were larger than her own, dominated by a massive fireplace and windows that overlooked the darkening forest. A table had been set near the hearth, laden with dishes that smelled of rosemary and roasted meat. You don't have to do this, Freya said as he pulled out her chair. I'm capable of eating in my own rooms. And deprive me of your company? He took the seat across from her, his size making the chair look fragile beneath him. I've spent 3 centuries eating alone, Freya. Indulge an old king his pleasures. She almost smiled. You're not old. I'm ancient by any reasonable measure. The silver in my hair isn't decorative. It suits you. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and heat crept up her neck. I mean, it makes you look distinguished. Not old. His eyes warmed, the gray softening toward something almost gentle. I will treasure that assessment. They ate in companionable silence for a time, the fire crackling between them. The food was excellent, better than anything she'd eaten in months, better than the elaborate dishes served at Marcus's wedding feast. But Freya found herself distracted by the man across from her. The way he cut his meat with precise, economical movements, the way firelight played across the sharp planes of his face, the way his presence filled the room without overwhelming it. Her wolf stirred, pressing toward him through the incomplete bond. My mother used to say that sharing a meal was the truest form of trust, Freya said quietly, that you could learn everything about a person by watching them eat. Bastian set down his knife. What have you learned about me? That you're patient. She met his eyes, finding it easier than she'd expected. You haven't rushed me. Haven't demanded anything. Even now with Sebastian here, with the threat he represents. You're not using this as an excuse to push the bond. I told you I would wait. Men say many things they don't mean. A shadow crossed his features. Grief. Old and weathered but still present. I have loved exactly once in 300 years. She was not my mate, we knew that. But she was kind and warm, and she made me feel less alone in this endless existence. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rougher. She died in childbirth, the baby as well. I was told I could have claimed another, tried again, but I couldn't. The emptiness seemed preferable to the risk. Freya's chest ached with unexpected sympathy. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. I've had centuries to make peace with it. His eyes found hers again, and the gold was there, banked but present. When you collapsed in my territory, I felt something I hadn't felt since before her death. A purpose beyond simply ruling. A reason to care about tomorrow. You didn't know me, you still don't, really. No. His smile was small, almost rueful. But I know what the bond means. I know that fate, or the moon, or whatever force governs these things, looked at both of us in our separate griefs and said, "These two belong together." I've lived too long to dismiss such things as coincidence. Freya set down her own fork, her appetite forgotten. The baby isn't yours. It will never be yours, not truly. Whatever the bond is between us, it doesn't change that I'm carrying another man's child. Do you know who he was? The merchant? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected condemnation, not curiosity. No. He was kind. He had warm eyes and a gentle laugh, and he made me feel safe when everything around me was crumbling. He vanished before dawn. I never even learned his name. And you loved him? I loved the escape he offered. The reminder that I was more than a pawn in Sebastian's games. She looked down at her hands. Is that terrible? That I don't even know if I loved the father of my child? Bastian rose from his chair and crossed to her, sinking to one knee as he had in the library. His hand found hers, engulfing it in warmth. The child will be ours, he said quietly, if you'll let it. I swore to you that they would want for nothing, and I meant it. Not as charity, Freya, as family, as mine. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Why would you want that? A constant reminder that you survived. That you found comfort when comfort was denied to you. That you carry proof that you are stronger than everything they tried to break in you. His thumb traced across her knuckles. I would raise this child as my heir if you allowed it. I would love them because they are part of you, and you are my mate. A sob caught in her throat, not of grief, but of something raw and healing. She'd expected disgust. She'd expected conditions and compromises and the careful calculation that had defined every interaction with her brother. She hadn't expected this absolute acceptance. The court will never accept it, she whispered. A bastard on the throne. The court will accept what I tell them to accept. His voice hardened. I have ruled alone for 3 centuries. They have begged me to take a mate, to produce heirs, to ensure the succession. They will not complain now that I've finally obliged them. Freya looked at him, truly looked, past the ancient power and the silver-touched hair and the eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Beneath it all, she saw loneliness, centuries of it, carved into features that might have been carved from stone. She saw someone as broken as she was, reaching across the darkness for connection. I'm afraid, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I know. He didn't minimize it, didn't offer empty reassurances. I'm afraid too. Of what? His smile was soft and sad and honest. Of losing you before I ever truly have you. Of failing to protect you when it matters most. Of watching another woman I care for be taken by forces I cannot control. He stood, releasing her hand, and the absence of his warmth felt like a physical loss. Sleep on it, he said quietly. Tomorrow, Sebastian will present his case to my council. Whatever happens, know that you have my protection. Always. He left her there, surrounded by firelight and the remnants of dinner, with his words echoing in her ears and her heart cracking open a little wider. The attack came 3 nights later. Freya had taken to walking the gardens at dusk, when the roses seemed to glow with their own inner light, and the palace felt less like a gilded prison. Bastian had assigned guards to shadow her, but they kept their distance, watching from the garden's edges while she traced paths between the silver blooms. She was thinking of the council meeting that morning, Sebastian's smooth arguments, his appeals to pack law and family honor, his careful performance of a concerned brother seeking reconciliation. Bastian had rejected every proposal, his voice cold and final. She remains under my protection. This discussion is closed. Sebastian's face had been a mask of diplomatic acceptance. His eyes had been murder. She was thinking of Bastian's hand at the small of her back as they'd left the council chamber. The way his touch had steadied her, grounded her, reminded her that she wasn't alone in this fight. She was thinking that maybe, just maybe, she could trust him after all. The first wolf emerged from the hedge line without warning. Not one of her guards. A stranger, red-brown fur matted with mud, yellow eyes fixed on her with predatory intent. A rogue, she realized with horror. Unaffiliated, unpredictable, dangerous in ways that pack wolves rarely were. A second emerged, then a third. Freya stumbled backward, her hand going to her belly instinctively. The baby. She had to protect the baby. Guards. Her voice came out thin, strangled by fear. Guards! The rogues lunged. She ran. Her feet were still tender from her barefoot flight through the snow, but terror drove her forward, through rose bushes that tore at her skirts and pathways that blurred in her peripheral vision. She could hear them behind her, paws on frozen ground, snarls that promised violence. The fountain rose before her, a dead end. Stone walls on three sides, the rogues cutting off her retreat. Freya turned to face them, her back against cold marble, her hands pressed to her belly where her child grew. Three wolves with hunger in their eyes. No weapon, no escape. The bond pulsed in her chest, a door she'd kept closed, a connection she'd feared to use. Bastian. She threw herself against it with everything she had, reaching for him across the distance, calling through a bond she'd never fully accepted until this moment. Please, please, they're going to kill me. The wolves stalked closer, yellow eyes gleaming with anticipation. And somewhere in the palace, a king roared. Bastian exploded through the hedge line in full shift, his wolf form massive and silver dark, a creature of nightmare and legend that sent the rogues scattering in momentary confusion. But they were desperate wolves, hired for coin or promised something worth dying for, and desperation made them stupid. The first rogue lunged for Bastian's flank. The Alpha King pivoted with speed that defied his size, jaws closing around the attacker's neck with a wet crunch. He threw the body aside like a rag doll, already spinning to face the second. Freya pressed herself against the fountain's cold stone, her heart hammering so violently she could feel it in her throat. The third rogue, the one with the matted red-brown fur, wasn't watching the fight. It was watching her. Circling slowly, using Bastian's distraction as cover. She opened her mouth to scream a warning, but the rogue was faster. It launched itself at her, jaws aimed at her throat, and time fractured into crystalline fragments. Her wolf surged forward with a ferocity she'd never felt before, not just protecting herself, but protecting the life inside her. Heat blazed through her veins and her hands transformed mid-motion, fingernails lengthening into curved claws that gleamed in the dying light. She slashed upward instinctively, catching the rogue across the muzzle as it reached her. The wolf yelped, momentum carrying it past her. Blood sprang across the fountain's marble edge. It stumbled, shook itself, and turned for another attack. Bastian's massive form slammed into it from the side, bearing it to the ground. His jaws found its throat, and the rogue's struggles ceased. Silence fell over the garden, broken only by Bastian's labored breathing and the distant shouts of guards finally responding to the chaos. Three rogue bodies lay scattered among the silver roses, their blood turning the snow to pink slush. Bastian shifted, rising from the carnage as a man, naked and splattered with crimson. His eyes found Freya immediately, burning gold, his chest heaving. "Are you hurt?" His voice was barely recognizable, still more growl than words. Freya looked down at her hands, human again, but streaked with blood that wasn't hers. No, the baby. She pressed her palms to her belly, reaching inward with senses she didn't fully understand. The flutter was there, strong and steady. Safe, we're safe. Bastion crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her against his chest despite the blood, despite everything. She felt his heart thundering against her cheek, felt the fine tremor running through his powerful frame. You called to me. His voice was raw. Through the bond, I heard you. I didn't know if it would work. It will always work. His arms tightened. Always, Freya. No matter how far. No matter what. The guards arrived then, spilling into the garden with weapons drawn and questions tumbling over each other. Bastion released her only long enough to issue commands, secure the perimeter, examine the bodies, find out how rogues penetrated the palace grounds. But Freya already knew. She'd seen the answer in the 3rd rogue's eyes before it attacked. The calculated intelligence, the specific focus on her, rather than Bastion. These weren't random rogues. They'd been sent. Sebastian Ashford stood in chains before the Alpha King's throne, his diplomat's mask finally cracked beyond repair. The great hall was full. Nobles, guards, servants who'd found excuses to linger near doorways. Word had spread through the palace like wildfire. The envoy from Ashford Pack had been found guilty of hiring assassins. The brother had tried to murder his own sister. Freya sat in the chair beside Bastion's throne, the one he'd given her that first night in the Great Hall. Her hands were steady in her lap, but beneath her calm exterior, her wolf paced with agitated energy. Part of her still couldn't believe it. Couldn't reconcile the brother she'd grown up with. The boy who'd once protected her from bullies, with the man who'd paid strangers to tear out her throat. The rogues talked before they died, Bastion said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. They were promised gold and territory in exchange for killing the woman carrying the Ashford shame. They named you, Sebastian Ashford, as the one who hired them. Sebastian's chin lifted, defiance warring with fear in his blue eyes. They were rogues, liars by nature. You cannot take their word over mine. I also have testimony from your own servant. Bastion gestured, and a trembling man was led forward. One of Sebastian's attendants, his face pale with terror. He watched you meet with the rogues. He heard you give the orders. The servant wouldn't look at Sebastian. It's true, Your Majesty. Lord Ashford paid them himself, told them to make it look like an accident. Or better yet, to frame your enemies for the attack. He said. The man swallowed hard. He said the whore and her bastard had to disappear before they ruined everything. Sebastian's composure shattered. You pathetic, sniveling... He lunged against his chains, only to be jerked back by the guards holding him. His eyes found Freya, and they blazed with hatred so pure it made her flinch. This is your fault, all of it. If you'd just done what you were told, if you'd just been the obedient bride and kept your legs closed. Enough. Bastion's voice cracked through the hall like thunder. He rose from his throne, power radiating from him in waves that pressed against everyone present. Several nobles took involuntary steps backward. You have confessed to attempted murder of a woman under my protection, of my mate. The word rippled through the crowd. Mate. The Alpha King had claimed her openly. Sebastian laughed. A high, desperate sound. Your mate? She's ruined goods, Windrider. Damaged. Carrying some peasant's bastard in her belly. You could have any woman in the realm and you choose the Ashford whore? Bastion moved. One moment he stood by his throne. The next, his hand was around Sebastian's throat, lifting him until his feet dangled above the stone floor. Say it again. Bastion's voice had dropped to something barely human, his eyes pure molten gold. Call her that one more time. Give me the excuse I'm looking for. Sebastian's face purpled. His hands clawed uselessly at Bastion's grip. Your Majesty. Freya's voice cut through the tension. She'd risen from her chair, standing tall despite the trembling in her legs. Put him down, please. Bastion's head turned toward her, the predator in his eyes warring with something softer when he looked at her. He tried to kill you. I know. She stepped closer, close enough to lay her hand on his arm, the one holding her brother aloft. But if you kill him like this, in anger, you become what they whisper about. The brutal king. The monster on the throne. Her fingers tightened on his forearm. I want him to face justice, Bastion. Real justice. Let the realm see what happens to those who threaten your mate. For a long moment, Bastion didn't move. Then, slowly, he lowered Sebastian to the ground. He didn't release him, but his grip loosened enough for the other man to gasp in desperate breaths. Execution, Bastion said flatly. At dawn, the sentence for attempted regicide. Regicide? Sebastian croaked. She's not. She is my mate. She will be my queen. The child she carries will be my heir. Bastion's voice rang through the hall, final and absolute. Your attack on her was an attack on the crown itself. There is only one punishment. Sebastian's eyes found Freya's, and for just a moment she saw something beneath the hatred. Fear, and beneath that, the ghost of the brother she remembered. The one who'd taught her to ride, who'd held her hand at their mother's funeral. That brother had died long before tonight, she realized. Consumed by ambition and resentment, by their father's failures and his own desperate need for control. I should have killed you myself, Sebastian whispered. That night in the snow, I should have made sure you died. You tried. Freya's voice was steady, stronger than she'd expected. You threw me into a blizzard, pregnant and barefoot, expecting the cold to do what you lacked the courage to do yourself. You called me a whore in front of everyone I'd ever known. You stripped me of my name, my family, my home. She stepped closer, close enough that Sebastian could see the silver of her eyes, the iron in her spine. And I survived. I found my mate. I found my place. You have no power over me anymore, Sebastian. You never will again. Sebastian's face contorted with rage, and he lunged. Bastion's claws were at his throat before he'd moved an inch, drawing thin lines of blood. Try that once more, the king said pleasantly, and I'll start the execution early. Sebastian went still. Take him to the cells. Bastion released him, shoving him toward the guards. At dawn, he dies. Let the Ashford pack know that their former heir has been found guilty of treason against the crown. Any who wish to challenge this judgment are welcome to face me in the arena. The guards dragged Sebastian away, his protests echoing off the stone walls until they faded into silence. They found each other in Bastion's private chambers, the celebration in the great hall a distant hum beyond the thick stone walls. Freya had changed out of her blood-stained gown into a simple dress of deep blue, her hair loose around her shoulders. Bastion had washed away the evidence of the evening's violence, though she could still see the weight of it in his eyes. You could have let me kill him in the hall. He stood by the fire, staring into the flames. I wanted to. I know. He would have deserved it. Yes. She crossed to him, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. But you're not just any Alpha, Bastion. You're the king. What you do, how you do it, it matters. It shapes the realm for generations. His laugh was soft, surprised. You sound like a queen already. Maybe I'm starting to feel like one. He turned to face her, and the gold was there in his eyes, banked but present. The bond hummed between them, that thread of connection she'd fought against for days, singing with new intensity. Freya. His voice was rough. What happened in the garden? When you called to me, I accepted it. The bond. She held his gaze, letting him see the truth of it. I stopped fighting it and I reached for you, and you came. You saved my life. You saved your own life. His hand rose to cup her cheek, infinitely gentle despite its size. Those claws. You fought back. For the baby. For yourself. His thumb traced her cheekbone. You're stronger than you know. Stronger than anyone has ever let you be. The warmth of his touch spread through her, melting ice she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. I'm tired of being afraid, she whispered. I'm tired of waiting for the next betrayal, the next blow. I want... She struggled for words. I want to feel safe. Really safe. I want to know that tomorrow isn't something to dread. You're safe with me. His forehead pressed against hers. Always. I swear it on my life, on my crown, on the 3 centuries I've lived in the darkness waiting for you. A tear slipped down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb. Bastion. Her voice trembled. I want to complete the bond. Tonight. I don't want to wait anymore. He went still, his breathing ragged. Are you sure? After everything today, if you need time, I've had nothing but time. Time to run, time to hide, time to rebuild walls that kept everyone out. She took his hand and pressed it to her heart, letting him feel its rapid thunder. I don't want walls between us anymore. I want you. All of you. I want to be yours. The sound he made was barely human, a growl of pure longing that vibrated through her bones. His mouth found hers, the kiss deep and desperate, tasting of fire and finally and forever. When they broke apart, both gasping, he bared his throat to her. The gesture struck her breathless. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the realm, offering her his most vulnerable place, trusting her completely. You first, he said roughly. Mark me first, Freya. Let me belong to you before I claim you. Her wolf surged forward with fierce joy. She rose on her toes, her lips finding the junction of his neck and shoulder, that sacred place where the bond would anchor. She could feel his pulse beneath her mouth, racing as fast as her own. Yours, she whispered against his skin, and bit. His blood flooded her mouth, copper and pine and something electric, and the bond between them blazed like a door thrown open to sunlight. She felt him, his centuries of loneliness, his grief, his hope, his love pouring into her like molten gold. She felt his wolf howl in triumph, felt his hands shake where they gripped her waist. When she released him, he was trembling. The bite mark stood vivid on his throat, already healing into a permanent scar. A claim. Her claim on a king. Mine, he growled, and there was nothing human left in his voice. His hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head to expose her throat. My mate. My queen. His teeth found her skin, and the pain was brief, bright, transforming in an instant to pleasure that radiated to her fingertips, her toes, the very center of her being. She cried out, not in fear but in completion, feeling the bond settle into place like a key turning in a lock. She felt everything he felt. Love, vast and ancient and patient as mountains. Desire, held in check by iron control. And beneath it all, a fierce protectiveness that wrapped around her and the baby both, claiming them utterly. Mate, he breathed against her throat. Mine, forever. Yours, she answered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Forever. He held her as the bond settled between them, golden and certain, an unbreakable thread connecting soul to soul. She could feel him in her chest, a warmth that would never fade. She could feel his heartbeat as clearly as her own. The baby, he murmured eventually, his hand sliding down to rest on her belly. Our baby. Our, not hers. Not a bastard to be hidden or ashamed to be erased. Theirs. Our heir, she agreed, covering his hand with her own. They crowned her 3 days later in a ceremony that filled the great hall with every noble in the realm. Freya wore silver and white, the colors of winter and moonlight, with a circlet of diamonds resting on her dark hair. Bastian placed the crown on her head himself, speaking the ancient words that had been spoken to queens for millennia. Rise, Luna Queen. Rule beside me, now and always. The court knelt. Freya looked out over the sea of bowed heads, feeling the weight of the crown and the warmth of the bond and the flutter of the baby inside her. 6 months ago, she had been nothing. A pawn, a bargaining chip, a disgrace cast into the snow to die. Now she was queen. Bastian's hand found hers, his fingers interlacing with her own. Through the bond, she felt his pride, his joy, his complete and utter certainty that she belonged exactly where she stood. Word had come that morning from the Ashford pack. Sebastian's execution had sent shockwaves through the territory, followed swiftly by her coronation announcement. The new Alpha, a cousin she barely remembered, had sent a groveling letter begging forgiveness, offering tribute, promising eternal loyalty to the crown. Freya had dictated the response herself. The Ashford pack is forgiven, but not forgotten. Prove your loyalty through actions, not words. Queen's words. She was still learning to wear them. That night, standing on their private balcony as the stars wheeled overhead, Bastian pulled her close against him. His hand rested on her belly, where their child had begun to kick. Tiny movements that never failed to make him smile. Regrets? He asked softly. She considered the question. The brother who'd betrayed her was dead. The family who'd cast her out was broken and rebuilding. The traveling merchant whose kind eyes had given her this baby would never know what he'd set in motion. And here she stood, marked and mated to a king who loved her, carrying an heir who would never know abandonment or fear, ruling a realm that had bowed at her feet. None. She turned in his arms, rising to kiss him. Not a single one. The mate bond sang between them, golden and certain, as eternal as the stars. Somewhere in the palace, servants prepared the nursery. In the great hall, nobles celebrated their king's happiness. Beyond the walls, peace stretched across the realm like a promise. Freya rested her head against Bastian's chest, listening to his heartbeat. Steady, strong, hers. She had walked through fire and ice, through betrayal and despair, through the very gates of death. She had been called whore and shame and nothing. Now she was queen, mate, mother, home.